Hey folks, this is Dr. Gerstmar from Aspire Natural Health, and just so you know, this is take 4. This is the 4th time I've tried to put together this vlog for you guys, so this is just how much I like you and how much I really wanted to share this information with you. Beautiful sunny day here in Seattle today. We are enjoying summer in the springtime. So, topic for another vlog, another day, but make sure you're getting out there, getting some good, healthy sun exposure. All right, so today we are talking about adrenal health. So the concept of adrenal fatigue has become pretty popular. The mainstream community, by and large, just does not recognize this at all. They only recognize the two extremes of adrenal fatigue. That is, when you have way too much adrenal hormone, there's a symptom called Cushing's. When you have absolutely basically no adrenal hormones left, no cortisol left, that is a disease called Addison's, and that's generally an autoimmune disease. So we have these two extremes, and then of course in the middle, we have what we recognize as functional adrenal dysfunction, right, where the adrenals aren't broken but they're not working correctly anymore. So mostly we have this thing called adrenal fatigue, which is where people are just tired all the time. They get their lab tests and the doctors say, hey, everything looks normal for you. Then we have kind of the subset that goes the other way, too much, which is called functional adrenal hyper, too much corticolism. So functionally having too much cortisol, and this tends to be people who can't lose weight, right? They often have sleep disturbances and some other stuff. So we have this adrenal fatigue, all right? So I'm going to take a moment to talk on this, then I have a study that I want to share with you guys. So why do we have so much adrenal fatigue in the first place? The reality is that we live lives that are just out of sync with what our bodies evolved to deal with, and how we're supposed to handle stress. So stress is essentially a fight or flight reaction, right? Our body responding to something as if it's dangerous, with the priming us to either fight off that thing or run away from it. So whether that's at a cellular level, like we're being attacked by viruses or bacteria, or food reactions, for example, or whether it's kind of at a whole body level, like a tiger's chasing us or something, right? That stress response. And so historically, evolutionarily, our ancestors dealt with very short, discrete periods of very high stress level. Either they were starving, right? Something was chasing them, wanted to eat them, or they were chasing something else, trying to get dinner, or dealing with, finding a partner, or dealing with some social situations. For the most part, their stress loads were very high for very short periods of time. And then they went back to baseline of having very low general stress levels. So a very low general stress level, because again, right, no mortgages, no bosses, no commutes, no bills, none of the things that get us in modern life. And then there would be punctuated by periods of very high stress level. Well, what happens, with an animal, any other type of animal other than the human animal, when they're exposed to these high stress levels? They go into panic mode, right? Deal with the issue that's going on, and then you see them, they'll kind of shiver and shake off a lot of that stress load, basically de-stress, and then go back to that low stress load. So that is how most animals deal with that kind of high level acute stress. Modern humans, of course, we deal with something entirely different. So most of us rarely, if ever, have those high acute stress loads, sometimes, but for the most part, we're not dealing with, serious high stress loads. What we're dealing with are these chronic lower stress loads. So instead of having a big spike and a return to baseline, most of us are just cruising along up and down a little bit at these kind of chronic low-grade stress levels, where we invoke or cause these stress responses in the body, all the biochemistry, all the physiology to shift, but then we never actually deload or de-stress from any of that. So we're suffering from this chronic, high stress level that we never deal with. And over time, right, the adrenal system, the stress response just begins to malfunction and burn out, and a lot of us end up with this adrenal fatigue. right? So fundamentally, adrenal fatigue is about a mismatch that's going on between what we deal with on a day-to-day basis and sort of what the human animal, what our systems have evolved to cope and deal with. And we never de-stress, deload and that chronic stress that we're dealing with. So fundamentally, to fix adrenal fatigue, right, we'll talk about, you can do research, or we talk about these adaptogenic herbs, things like, ginseng, ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil. There's a whole different, a whole slew of these herbs that can be incredibly helpful for people. And we use them constantly. They're among some of my favorite herbs, and they can really do wonders for people. Hey folks, so right in the middle of that, my neighbor decided to start up some heavy equipment, so I had to stop filming. This feels like the vlog that just does not want to be born, but we're going to soldier ahead and keep going. So listen, we were talking about adaptogenic herbs, right? These are an incredibly useful class of herbs that are very helpful for adrenal fatigue. I've seen them time and again be incredibly helpful for people. But fundamentally, the issue is the mismatch that we have going on. Now, most of us can't opt out of our lives, right? We can't quit our jobs, quit our kids, quit our bills, leave our house, do all this kind of stuff. So the reality is we're just going to have to deal with some of that as it comes. And things like the adaptogenic herbs can be really helpful, putting in appropriate exercise, right? So exercise, when it's moderate, is stress reducing for people, but when it's too much is actually stress provoking, right? It can make it worse for people. So we often see people hasten the push into adrenal fatigue by exercising too much. And it's really hard for them, but usually one of the things we have to do is dial back on the exercise in order to get people to be feeling better. Right. So as you can, some exercise, right? Making sure you're getting enough sleep at night, huge for basically all of us. And then doing things, whether it's meditation, whether it's, some sort of journaling or some other stress reduction technique. If you didn't see, I had my first experience with a float tank or a sensory deprivation tank just recently. And that was a heck of a fun experience, really interesting. You get in, you're floating in, a sealed pod, right? Not real claustrophobic, pretty big. It's got 10 inches of water and apparently 1,000 pounds of salt in there. 3 times, this is what they told me, 3 times denser than the Dead Sea. So you just float in there. You get in there, and first thing for me realizes just how tense you are, physically tense, right? So you're working on relaxing, releasing all that tension. Then you realize just how your mind is just going away, and then it takes a little while, that calms down, then finally everything grounds down, and you feel like your nervous system just goes incredibly relaxing experience. Other people get it through massage. There's a lot of ways to get there, but the reality is most of us deal with way too much of this chronic stress, and it's restructuring our lives, and it's taking some preventative steps that are the key to ultimately curing adrenal fatigue. And things like the adaptogenic herbs and nutrients and some other things can absolutely play a role for people, but fundamentally we got to get to the root cause. Now, where this gets exciting, a new study that said, well, why with this chronic stress load do some people suffer adrenal fatigue and others don't? And the answer may come down to gut bacteria. So an interesting study, I'll give you the title, it's quite a mouthful. It's Postnatal Microbial Colonization Programs the Hypothalamic Pituitary Adrenal System for Stress Response in Mice. So let's break down that title. In mice. So as we know, mice are not fuzzy little people. Findings in mice and rats don't always apply to human beings. But in this case, the stress response is incredibly ancient, and so are the bacteria. So for me, it is likely that we'll see a similar result in humans that we do in mice. So breaking down the title a little more, postnatal, so this is after birth, microbial colonization. So we are born more or less devoid of bacteria. There's some debate about that. We don't seem to have a lot, at least. And when we are born, we get our first exposure to bacteria, and they colonize us, and they start interacting with us. So postnatal microbial colonization programs, right? the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. So this is the HPA. If you've done some research on the internet or heard it, you'll hear the HPA. Hypothalamic pituitary is the brain. Adrenal, of course, are the adrenal glands. So it's this brain-adrenal connection because, of course, the adrenal glands are the factory that produce these hormones. The brain is the foreman, if you will, or the controller that signals the adrenals what to do. So we're finding out that the bacteria that you get shortly after birth help program the brain-adrenal connection for a stress response. Okay, so let's get into it. There were 3 groups of mice in this study. There were mice who had normal, healthy gut bacteria. There were mice who had no bacteria whatsoever. So these are called germ-free mice. They're kept in special sterile cages where they just don't get any bacterial exposure. And then there were the mice that got pathogenic or bad bacteria. And so what did they find? They found that they took these young mice and they stressed them. Now, these mice are basically identical in every way except for the bacteria that they have. They stressed them, and then they measured how they responded to stress. And so we had the baseline stress response of the mice with the normal bacteria. The normal bacteria. We had that baseline. Then we had the mice who had no bacteria, right? And we found that the stress response to the same stress was significantly greater. So they had a greater stress response in response to that stress than the mice with normal bacteria. And then we had our third group, those who had been infected with bad bacteria. And we found that their stress response was even greater than the mice who had no bacteria. So what does this tell us? Having good bacteria, right, the normal healthy bacteria, helps program our brain adrenal system so that it doesn't over-respond to a stressor. Not having those bacteria means that programming doesn't happen, and so people get a greater stress response. And then even worse, if we get the wrong kind of bacteria, we find that it programs it to be even more significant. So you have a greater stress response to that stress than you would do normally. So what did they find? They found that by putting normal bacteria back into the other mice that didn't have it, specifically a strain called Bifidobacterium infantis, which is, as its name says, infantis, it's really prevalent in normal infants. They found that it renormalized that stress response for people. So this is really critical. It's saying, listen, in mice and almost assuredly in humans too, that early bacterial exposure helps program the stress response to be normal. So this goes back to as often as possible, babies need to be born vaginally because the vaginal canal, as they're going through being delivered, that's where they get their first exposure to bacteria, right? That's where they're supposed to pick up normal, healthy bacteria. In this country, we have an epidemic of cesarean sections. Now, C-sections are great. We're so glad they're there. They save women's lives. They save babies' lives. But the vast majority, probably 80% of C-sections, are really not needed. They're performed either for the doctor's convenience, for the woman's convenience, for the hospital's convenience, or honestly, cynically here, folks, to make the hospital a buck, because they definitely make a lot more money off of performing C-sections than just normal labor and delivery. The reality is most of these C-sections, as we can see by comparing us in the US against Europe, don't need to happen. So why would we want to avoid these? Well, first of all, it's a major surgery, right? Anybody in their right mind doesn't want to have to go a major invasive surgery if they don't really need it. Secondly, what we find is babies, again, when they're born normally, they get this bacterial inoculation, or they get this whole thing started by vaginal flora. When babies are taken out of the abdomen, right, with a C-section, they miss all that. The fact is, when we study them, what we find is the bacteria they pick up are skin bacteria. So whether that's from the mom, from her abdomen, or the mom or the dad or the relatives or the friends touching the baby, or the nurses or the doctors touching the baby, the reality is they get a completely different set of bacteria starting this colonization process than does a vaginally born baby. And studies like this we're looking at show us that this is a problem, right? When babies get the normal good bacteria, things start being programmed correctly. When they don't, things start to go off kilter, right? So whenever possible, we should try and avoid C-sections. The same goes for antibiotics. Man, are we glad they're there. They save lives. but they're so inappropriately overused. So the reality is everyone, from little people to everyone, we want to avoid unnecessary antibiotic exposure. But this is doubly important, right, for babies and infants. We'd also like to see mom, whenever it's possible, avoid antibiotics shortly before birth, right? Because even if the baby is born vaginally, if mom has been dosed up with antibiotics, chances are baby's not getting a good first shot of bacteria because of all those antibiotics, right? Again, not to say if you or your baby need antibiotics, please take them. But wherever we can, we need to take steps to try and avoid this, right? So avoiding C-sections where possible, avoiding antibiotics wherever possible, and then the third piece is breastfeeding. Now, breastfeeding is huge, and women are not told about the importance, right? They're said, oh, breastfeeding is important, but whatever. And most critically, they're not supported. Right? They're not given training so they know how to breastfeed. Many women don't see their moms, their sisters, their cousins, other women around them breastfeeding to learn from. And doctors and nurses and most of the healthcare providers are absolutely terrible at showing women what they need to do to breastfeed. And then, of course, our whole job situation, spousal support, and everything else in this country are really stacked against women. So listen, I'm not saying it's easy, but women, we need to encourage you and do everything we can to push to encourage breastfeeding. Why? Because it is more than just nutrition for the baby, though that's critically important. Breast milk supports the growth of a normal and healthy bacteria in the baby. Again, we're seeing how important this is for programming stress response, and bottle feeding supports an entirely different kind of population. And it is likely that it is a contributing factor to some of what's going on for people. So what we can see is setting up the right bacteria is critically important. And if you have that bad bacteria, reintroducing good bacteria can go a long ways towards helping things. One last piece. So if a baby is born C-section, what I do recommend is that a woman either get some gauze or cotton or something, insert it vaginally, right? Pick up those secretions, that fluid, all those bacteria, and then honestly, guys, as gross as this sounds, but smear it all over baby's mouth, nose, inside their mouth, their face, their ears, all these places that should have picked up this vaginal flora in the first place. We can give it a kickstart by doing it ourselves, right? So I firmly believe that we should do this if mom's healthy, but needed a C-section or baby did because it's the way that it is. Just get some gauze, right, or a cotton ball or anything, insert it vaginally, pick up that fluid, those bacteria, and then, a couple times a day for the first days, just swab baby all over, put it on the breast if you're going to be breastfeeding, and help baby get that good flora. Because here's the deal. Here's one of the critical pieces from this study, is that they found that, yes, if they introduce those bacteria, the good bacteria, early on, it normalized the system. But here's the problem. If they waited a while and then introduced those good bacteria, it did not normalize the system. So there seems to be a critical window where if those bacteria are present, they do their job. But once we pass that window, even putting those bacteria in don't seem to fix the issue. Now this is where we go, hey, are we kind of doomed in a way? If for example, you and I who are watching this, if we were cesarean section or breastfed or just picked up, or not breastfed, right? Picked up bad bacteria, had a ton of antibiotics or whatever, right? Are we doomed? Well, the optimist in me always likes to hope. We always hold out for a cure. We always try. We're always hoping, hey, it's my knowledge isn't good enough as a doctor. My tools aren't good enough as a doctor. And if we just keep pushing our knowledge, refining our tools, we can correct some of these issues, right? That's always my hope. That's always, the baseline that I work from. But some of these studies are saying, look, guys, it may be a little too late for us. If we have these exaggerated stress responses which bias us towards more easily picking up adrenal fatigue, adrenal dysfunction, right? That may be our baseline, and we may just have to deal with that. So people come in and they say, why can't I heal? Why does this person over here not have this problem, and why do I have the problem? And the reality is, it might be some of this early life programming that you got. And the reality is we may not be able to fix it. Okay, so doubly important that we take the time, we do good preconception care. We'll talk about preconception care in another video, and I'm very passionate about it because it can make, as we see, it can make such a huge difference for people growing up. It might in some ways be too late for you and me, but the next generation coming up, we might be able to make huge changes for them. Okay, so a very interesting study. Does our gut bacteria tie into adrenal fatigue, adrenal hyperresponse, adrenal dysfunction? This study seems to sure suggest that it does, okay? These bacteria seem to shape every facet of our lives, our health, and our disease. So please take care of your gut. If you're pregnant, thinking of becoming pregnant, or know someone who's pregnant, please share this with them. Please make sure that they have the right preconception care and baby has every chance that's possible. For those of us who it may be too late, we can still always work on redesigning our lifestyles. We can work on using the adaptogenic herbs. Guys, if I can be helpful for you, if we can be helpful for you, please contact us. It's www.aspirenaturalhealth.com or facebook.com/aspirenaturalhealth. We focus on people with gut dysfunctions, autoimmune diseases, and other hard to treat cases. We don't give up on people, and we're always here to help. If we can be of assistance to you, please feel welcome to contact us. Until we talk again next time, take care.